Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's special webinar on networking in the age of a pandemic, where we will explore the purpose and the reasons for actively networking, what it is, and how you can go about it when personal interactions are difficult. We're pleased to be able to bring you a distinguished panel of guests today to share with you their insights and their experiences. Our first contributor is Wongani Mtiki, a graduate of the University of Nebraska, who obtained her Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Exercise Health Science. Following her undergraduate studies, she has worked in community health, completed a postgraduate internship with the National Student Leadership Forum, and now works as a business analyst for Deloitte Consulting. Our second panel member is Baylor alum Ben Aguiñaga. Ben graduated from Baylor in 2012 with majors in political science and philosophy, with minors in mathematics and history. He then went to LSU Law School, where he finished #1 in his class, before going on to clerk for Justice Don Willett, as he was then, on the Texas Supreme Court, followed by a clerkship with Judge Edith Jones on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. He then went on to the U.S. Department of Justice as the Chief of Staff for the Civil Rights Division, and after 2 years at the DOJ, Ben went on to clerk for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. Following his clerkship with Justice Alito, Ben joined the international law firm of Jones Day and presently works in their DC office. Finally, we're pleased to welcome Stephanie Groen. Stephanie currently serves as Director of State and Federal Relations for Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, a job she has held since Governor Reynolds was sworn into office in May of 2017. Prior to that, she served as the Acting Director and Deputy Director for Governor Terry Branstad, now the Ambassador to China. She started her tenure in Washington, D.C. in the political department at the Republican National Committee and is a native of West Des Moines, Iowa. She's an avid defender of Iowa's first in the nation caucus status, as well as a proud alumni of Baylor University. Wongani, Ben, and Stephanie, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks to you, Ben.
Networking is, I think, a thing that a lot of people are told they're supposed to do, but no one really tells you how to do it, when to do it, why to do it. Perhaps if you could start by giving us a little bit of an insight into what networking done well actually is and looks like, and why college students should be aware of the need to do it now rather than having to push it back into professional life.
I can go ahead and start with that one,
Yeah,
Ben.
Stephanie, please do.
I feel like networking, to your point, it occasionally gets a bad rap, but I love networking because it really is all about relationships. I think one of the very cool things about DC in particular is so many people in DC are not from DC originally. They're from somewhere else, or went to school somewhere else. And when you network, you meet people and you make those connections. You find common ground. I think I've only been in DC for a little over 7 years, but I've already been amazed that someone I randomly met at a coffee shop or randomly had a conversation with at church, etc. You exchange business cards because that's what people in DC do, and they re-come up in your life in a way you never expected, 5 years down the road. And I've had a number of people who've been able to help me not only find a job, but give me advice in a career or something that I met in instances where I wasn't even going with the intent of networking. It was all just about building relationships. And I think that's valuable, not only in your career, but just in having a better life in general.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Stephanie said, I think there are two parts of your question, Ben. One is what is good networking, and I think that was one of the hardest lessons for me to learn early on, because in my heart of hearts, I'm an introvert, so it's not easy for me to just kind of like throw myself into this very social scene and strike up conversations with strangers. But I think if you think of networking as trying to find a friend or trying to find someone that you share particular interests with and that you would enjoy being around, not seeking out somebody for the sake of asking what can that person give me, but rather what kind of joint relationship can we have together that is enjoyable. So for me, like I love to cook, I love to barbecue, and so I love to invite people over to our house to kind of break bread, and that's a very kind of easy setting to diffuse and all the stilted small talk, and it's a great way to kind of find out what are those interests that you might share with somebody else. And then the second part of your question is why consider networking while you're still a student? And why not just start when you become a professional? I mean, I think one big reason to think about that now is a lot of the people that you're taking classes with and walking campus with aren't just going to disappear from your life. You're still going to have their phone numbers in your phone 5 or 10 years down the road, and you might get a call from them 5 or 10 years down the road when, in my case, they have a legal question, and you're the first person that comes to their mind because they remember that you were their classmates, you went to law school, and so you might have some insight into something that they're concerned with. And so I would just think about, establishing those kinds of good relationships early on with a view to perhaps returning back to those relationships down the road, even if you don't always stay in close contact with those people.
I first second everything that Stephanie and Ben just said, and I think it can feel manipulative if you call networking, and you're thinking of it just as, okay, what can I gain? Or is this person going to offer me a referral? But I think if you go into it with this mindset of what can I learn? And so sure, you are still gaining something, but you're without the expectation of, I guess, something specific, what's going to come out of that interaction with the person. So just coming in with an open mind, and maybe you go in to talk to them about law, like Ben said, or because he has something specific or specific topic, but then with this open mind of, okay, well, let's see what else happens. Then you could come across something else like, oh, we both love to bake, or they're also into yoga, or they have really great points of why moving to a certain city is a good idea, or what can actually be really hard about that. And so coming in with this mindset of, okay, I'm here to learn is, I think, really important. But then I also think it's really key to start doing this now, because this is a skill that you're going to use for the rest of your life, whether it's in your career or outside of your career. I mean, if you think about it, just making friends in a new town, that's a form of networking. And I also think that, and I'm sure that these students have heard this a lot, but just that saying of, you're never going to have as much time as you do right now. And I remember being a college student and hating that. I hated hearing that so much, because I thought, what are you talking about? I don't have any time. But it's really true, because it just, you'll see when you leave college, but especially now, we are living in this pandemic. And so I think so many of us have significantly more time on our hands. And so really using this time to do something that you wouldn't necessarily have as much time to do if you were in classes, 4 hours a week, or doing that internship 8 hours a day. And that also, I guess, thinking about what else can I be learning right now, and that networking, and even just the, I guess, art of networking is something that I think is a really good way to harness your time in this season.
And it's certainly not about what you're always getting. You might meet somebody and be in a position to give them something like, oh, you're in this business, let me introduce you to so-and-so that I already know. And that helps build that credibility and also that relationship that we talked about, because I think a lot of students worry that it's just this manipulative process, that I find these people to give me some kind of benefit, when really what you're doing is trying to expand that relational network that you have. Some of those relationships might give you a benefit at some point. Others may not, but it's still a beneficial kind of way to go about it. How would you approach networking pre-COVID, and in light of the difficulties of actually doing it now, where meeting face-to-face is very difficult? Could you perhaps walk us through the approaches that you would take in those two scenarios?
Pre-COVID, there are a couple of ways that you can go about networking. And I think one easy way to do it, and I'm speaking from a lawyer's perspective, and so this may be different from person to person, but at least in law, there are a number of different associations that have been developed around particular interests. So even when you're in law school, and in some cases in undergrad, There are organizations like the Federalist Society or the American Constitution Society or various other societies that hold coffees, luncheons, and maybe conferences, things like that, opportunities for members of the association or people who think that they might be interested in joining to come together, to meet each other and to mingle. And that's a really easy way to be exposed to a broad array of people in a very short span of time. I think another way, at least in my life, that has been a great way to network is to think about, in the search often for mentors, to think about people whose career trajectories are similar to what you hope your own career trajectory will look like. And so sometimes that means having a friend of a friend of a friend who knows that person and reaching out to your friend to go through that chain and meet the person. Sometimes it means cold emailing that person. And, you can write a very carefully worded email that kind of explains, like, look, I really admire what you've done so far in your life. I would love to be able to buy you coffee or buy you lunch and learn more about what you did at each step along the way in the hopes of replicating that in my life. So I think those are a couple of ways pre-COVID that I would look at networking, so-called networking. During COVID, obviously it's a little more restrained because you can't. It's more difficult to invite somebody to coffee or to lunch. But I think you can still email. I mean, and I don't know about calling. It depends on whether you have a pre-existing relationship with somebody. But if you don't, you can still send the same email I just described to you to somebody that you hope to meet. And in some ways, it's maybe easier to get that person to agree to talk with you because a phone call is much less of an intrusion on one's personal life and having to drive somewhere for lunch or drive somewhere for coffee or take more time out of the workday to meet with you. So I would use those kinds of pre-COVID ways to network and just kind of transpose them into however your given locality is addressing the COVID situation.
So I had a little bit of a break in between my internship when I moved out to DC and then starting my job now. And so I had a lot of time to basically pour everything into this. I wasn't going to school, was doing it temp jobs and part-time work. So some things that I did actually was, well, first, narrowing down what is it that you want to do? And assume that a lot of students kind of have that in mind, or maybe you have a couple of things in mind. And first off, that's okay. Or if you don't really know, that's also okay. And from there, I basically found a way to bring it up in pretty much every conversation with a new person I would meet. But it really started with asking people around me, hey, I'm really interested in consulting. Do you know anybody who would be willing to talk to me about their career in consulting? And I was actually really surprised by how many people were like, actually, yeah, I know someone here. I know someone here. And even just within those conversations, most of the time, without even asking, someone would say, I actually have a friend who's at a different firm. I would love to connect you. But also having the boldness to ask, at the end of the conversation, this has been so helpful. Thank you. Do you have any recommendations for next steps or for somebody else who you think may be beneficial for me to speak with? And so then from there, it just kind of kept trickling. And I would say that, always started with an email, kind of like what Ben said, or sometimes the phone call, but usually it always started with an email. And especially if I didn't know someone personally, just setting a ground of where the relationship came from, like, this is how I got your email address. And asking if they'd be willing to have an informational interview on the phone for 30 minutes or to meet in person. And some people would, usually it would be just based on that person's schedule. If actually I'm traveling a lot this week, let's talk on the phone. But a lot of people would say, actually, yeah, I'm in town. Why don't you come to the office and we can walk to a coffee shop really close by? And so I was actually just really encouraged that there were so many people who were willing to help. And I'm sure that Stephanie and Ben would actually agree with us also that that is true, I would say, of most people in DC. And I just kind of like to believe that's true of a lot of people, that they want to help. But something else that I would do is actually go onto my LinkedIn, and as I'm looking at companies that I'm interested in, see, okay, who do I know there? And if I don't know anybody personally, it'll usually tell you, you have a mutual connection with Sally Jane or whatever. And so email that person who I may have not spoken with since we graduated college, saying, hey, I saw that you're connected to Sally, who's at this firm. I'm looking into their work. Do you think she'd be willing to meet with me? And so that was another way. And that's something that you can easily translate into the times that we are now. You know, you're probably not going to be able to meet in person, but just being able to figure out how you're connected with different people through great resources like LinkedIn, I'd really leverage those.
And if you've got a contact of origin, often they'll do the introduction for you, which takes some of that awkwardness off the table.
Yeah. And someone that vouches for you, right?
Yeah.
This is my friend Wongani. This is what she's interested in. This is how we know each other. We work together in this. And so usually because, you know, it's coming from a voice that they trust, they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. I'd do anything for my friend Adam, you know, things like that.
Stephanie, you mentioned before meeting someone at a coffee shop and that developing into a relationship. Could you tell us a little bit about how you network both incidentally and deliberately?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, more deliberately, I would say when I first moved out to DC, I was an active networker for the similar reason of, number one, I had no friends here. So I really wanted to make friends. And number two, I was so eager about my career and what I wanted to do and the endless possibilities, but really didn't know what it was I wanted to do. And my first advice would be, let Baylor help you. I very actively plugged into the Baylor network in DC. I helped run the intern program before we had this robust, amazing program that you guys are now all getting to partake of. And Baylor actually gave me a list of alumni in the area, and I would set them up with interns, but then I would also email them and be like, here's your intern. Also, hi, I'm new here and I don't know anyone, and your job seems so interesting. Would you be willing to either chat with me over email or meet me for coffee or have a call sometime? And I was amazed at how many people responded yes. It even helped just having a Baylor connection, but that leads to everyone else's points. You never know who that person knows who's like, oh my goodness, you should meet so-and-so. I think you guys would really hit it off and get along. In terms of COVID, obviously that's pretty different, but going back to before, you never really know where situations are going to come to fruition later. I actually had a networking call just this week with someone who I've never met. I don't know. But I met her current boss while I was waiting in line for a Nationals game. You know, I have nothing in common with this person. I don't know him. He's like in his 50s, but we just got to chatting for quite a while in this long line, exchanged business cards. And randomly he messaged me on LinkedIn last week. He said, I remember you work in politics. A girl who works for me is newer to DC and is extremely interested in getting into politics. Would you chat with her? We had a great conversation. Turns out she wants to work for a California member, and one of my very close friends here runs a California office. And so I was able to connect them. So all that being said, it all just sparked from nothing intentional, just chatting with someone in a line, but you never know how those manifest out later. I also got very intentional about, I don't have room to barbecue, nor can I barbecue. But I host a monthly ladies' wine night actually at my apartment. And it started off with some girls who I would see at work events. And I was like, I always really enjoy talking with you, but it's a bummer we never see each other outside of work events or when we're not with our bosses, et cetera. So it started with just a once a month, I'm going to host something in my house. And it became into like, you can bring a friend or you can bring someone else. And now we rotate who hosts it. And it's gone virtual during COVID. So we now do a virtual wine night. But it's a great way to also get to know people who you work with on a deeper level, which I think then brings, first of all, a lot more joy in my own personal life, but also it makes it easier to connect on other things or other career things, et cetera. I would say also in politics in general, DC's made for networking. Like they make it, you have to actively try to not network here, I feel like. There's a lot of receptions, a lot of events, a lot of opportunities to just go and mingle. And usually you already have something in common with the person. To Ben's point, there's a lot of associations, et cetera. You already have a common interest or a common state or a common member. And I found a lot of those, you exchange business cards you don't know. And then, for example, I met a lot of healthcare people at Republican Governors Association meeting over the years, and I'm not an expert in healthcare. And I dug through those business cards and called a number of those people in the past 3 months because my boss needed advice on something, or we were interested in a product, or, you know, we needed help getting N95 masks. And it was so great that I had these, what seemed at the time, pointless conversations with these people over multiple interactions, because then when there was an instance, when it was then beneficial to both of us, beneficial to them and their company, but very beneficial to me also because my boss needed a resource and needed help. And it helped that we already had this baseline of having met in person, having connected, having talked, to then turn to in a job situation that was beneficial for everyone. So I think it can manifest itself in different ways.
I think too, in some sense, that's what makes networking so intimidating to a lot of students, is the event side of things, because you're trying to meet a particular person who's surrounded by 50 other people who also want to meet that person. And I think the business card is an excellent point, but I also think you need to have one of these, a pen, everywhere you go, because a really good practice was on my cab ride home from one of these events, I would get my pen out and I would make notes about who I spoke to. And it might be that I spoke to, you know, Jane Smith, and Jane Smith has 3 kids, one of which is a violinist. I make a note so that next time I see Jane, even if she doesn't remember me, I remember something personal about her, so that she is reminded, like, okay, this guy, I've met this guy at some point. This relationship has to now then step up in order to avoid the embarrassment of not knowing who you are. But it also personalizes things. You know, it does take a little bit of work. How we've talked about reaching out on LinkedIn and trying to initiate those informational interviews. But practically, once we get back to events, it can be very intimidating if you go to one of these events on your own or with only one other colleague to enter into a conversation with a stranger, because we don't do a lot of that anymore. So what tips do you have to overcome some of that initial reluctance to, you know, introduce yourself to somebody who you have no pre-existing relationship with?
I think my first piece of advice would be, do not let one awkward event or bad experience discourage you. Because unlike Ben, I know Ben mentioned he's an introvert. I'm like an extreme extrovert. Like I get happy networking. Like I just want to meet everyone in the room. It like makes me so happy, which I realize is truly not everyone's experience. And even with that outlook, I have had some very awkward networking experiences, or I went to an event alone and was like, this is so terrible. Like I didn't connect with anyone here. Like, what am I doing in this corner by myself? And you got to roll with it, because some you will have that experience sometimes, and it's unfortunate, but you learn from it and not the end of the world. For all the bad experiences, there's many more good ones to come. So don't let that intimidate you. Also, I mean, I don't really know what this looks like post-COVID, but sometimes you just gotta like put your hand out and introduce yourself, and you'll either find a connection or you won't. And I think you'll be surprised at how often you do find a connection, whether it's you have the same type of dog, or you, I don't know, went to the same baseball game. It's you never really know what it's going to be, but getting the guts up to just, I guess we probably won't shake hands in the future, but whatever that looks like, try find a connection.
So as far as the extrovert introvert spectrum, I am probably right in the middle on you two. I'm about 60% extroverted, I would say, but I love being alone and kind of having those 1 or 2 people like in a party or in a gathering. You know, I meet a bunch of people in the first like half hour. I'm like, all right, now I need some people. But I would say, I guess 2 things kind of came to mind for me. One, have some sort of script or an elevator pitch in mind. That way, when the person you're talking to asks you, well, so who you are, who are you? Or, you know, what do you do? or even just right away when you're introducing yourself, because you also want to be really respectful of their time. And so you want to get to why you want to talk to this person. And so something, I mean, pretty short, like 15 seconds, maybe. What is your name? Where are you studying if you're a student, or maybe if you're an intern, or, maybe you're already here working or you just moved in, but yeah, what are you interested in? So have something in mind, and that way you can use that anywhere you go, right? And you're not kind of stumbling over your words. And so that was the first thought I had. But then also just remembering that mostly everybody else there is in the same boat as you are. I think it's really easy to walk into a space and feel like, oh, this is a ginormous friend reunion, and everyone has known each other for like decades. But that's not true. And so I think if you just even come in thinking, okay, everybody else is meeting new people, that kind of lets you, relax your shoulders a little bit and think, okay, I can do this. But also going off of, Ben, what you said about always having a pen, so important. I also carry a very small notebook with me in my purse, like, almost everywhere I go. And I'm also someone who I know that if I write it down, but I never look at it again, I will definitely remember it. So that's just, I guess, another tip.
Yeah, and I just, to add two quick things to what both Stephanie and Wongani said. So one is very practical. I found that lines, as Stephanie hinted at, are very great ways to meet people. So like buffet lines or drink lines, I have found are much better ways to strike up the first conversation than just walking into a room and bombing a pre-existing conversation, or walking up to a random person who's not talking to anyone. That to me is like just like cringeworthy. I get like tingles up and down my spine if I have to do something like that. So I've always just used lines, especially long lines, as an excuse to kind of strike up a conversation with somebody next to me. So that's very practical. The second thought is to piggyback on what Nani said, which is, the elevator pitch, I think, is a great idea. I think if you've ever taken like a public speaking course, there's always that one teacher that talks about that preaches preparation, that if you're so prepared, if you have a mental lapse, if you have a brain fart and you can't think of something to say, because you're so prepared, your brain is just going to keep rolling, and the words are going to come out of your mouth even though you don't know that you're supposed to be saying them. So if you know what your standard answer is to what's your name, where are you from, where did you go to school, what are you interested in, where do you live, those kind of standard introductory questions, if you can distill down to 15 to 30 seconds what your ordinary answers are to those kinds of questions, you can ask those questions, or you can answer those questions if somebody asks them of you. Even if you're still nervous in the first few seconds of the conversation. And then once you get a minute into the conversation, usually the nerves will wear off and it's much easier to kind of maintain the conversation. So I would think about all those kind of easy questions to ask or answer early on. The only word of caution I would give you is that there are definitely people who are too scripted and who come across as approaching you just to sell themselves. And for any person, that can feel kind of off-putting. So it's a very delicate line between being confident in yourself and being prepared and knowing what you want to say if you have to say it, on the one hand, or on the other hand, being too confident, too scripted, so that the person across from you just feels like you're shoving yourself onto them. So you want to make sure to kind of
being built.
Yeah, you want to keep it easygoing. Try not to sound like you're reading a script. Try to make it as natural as possible so that it feels like a normal conversation, which in the end is what your goal is.
To piggyback one thing off what Ben said, which was amazing advice, I think also be prepared to ask questions you can ask them. People in DC and people in general love talking about themselves. it's very easy to build a connection if you get them talking first, ask them a number of questions if they seem comfortable, and then it will revert back to you, and then it makes it a little bit more natural, I think.
And it's so easy to find information out these days. Like if you have a LinkedIn profile, there's a resume there that you can make some talking points from very, very easily.
Yeah. I have one more point
please.
on that. Is I would think about, I guess, creative ways to ask the same question. As I don't think this is just true about DC. I think this is true about the United States. But a common question when you meet anyone, whether it's a business thing or not, is, oh, what do you do? And we mean, what do you do for work, right? But I have started saying, oh, well, how do you spend your time? And that kind of leaves it open-ended, and somebody can either answer with, oh, this is what I do for a profession, or these are my hobbies, some things I'm really passionate about. And then that also kind of gives you a little bit of an opening to make that personal connection, kind of what Ben was mentioning to earlier, but it also makes you memorable. And that person kind of has to stop a little bit and wonder, oh, that's interesting. And yes, that it's not necessarily this, oh, they specifically just want to know about what I do for work, but you're also subtly pointing out that there's a lot more to them than what they do for work.
I think the last thing just to add to that too is the follow through. This is a pointless exercise if you don't follow up. And if you finish the conversation with, let's get coffee sometime, then follow up and actually get something on the books, because otherwise it will never happen. And the execution at the back end is just as important. I want to turn very quickly to mentors before we jump into some student questions. But what's important about finding a mentor, and how does one go about finding one? Stephanie, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I feel like one of my first mentors I actually found while I was an undergrad at Baylor. I was working in the president's office, and I had heard through a mutual connection of this woman who was working in development at Baylor. So she wasn't another student. She was older than me, and she had worked in the White House for George W. Bush, which when I was an undergrad was like the gold standard of dream job I could ever fathom having for myself. And someone was like, you should reach out to her. I think she'd really love to, grab lunch with you or grab coffee. And I did. And we ended up building, it wasn't even just, it didn't feel like a mentor-mentee. It felt like a friendship. Like she genuinely became my friend. She was living downtown Waco at the time. I would go hang out at her apartment occasionally. We'd grab dinner, we'd grab lunch, and it just sparked this like really great friendship, but with someone who I really looked up to and admired, not even just the career path she had made for herself, but how she lived her life. And she's actually how I ended up getting my first job in DC. Someone who she had worked with in the White House, she had heard through the grapevine was hiring at the RNC, which is how I ended up getting this random job that they hadn't even posted. It was just like, you'll find out a lot in DC. It's not even just jobs being posted. It's people asking around, do you know someone who's looking for a job? And then interviews happen that way. And it was all from this random connection of just someone I had looked up to from the outside for very superficial reasons, totally just because of where she'd worked. And but then I got to know her and developed this deep connection. And I still see her. She doesn't live in DC. She lived in DC for a while, doesn't anymore. I still see her when she comes out. We grab lunch, grab coffee, catch up. She's someone I know I can reach out to for career advice. Actually, when I was torn between coming into the governor's office or another option, she was one of the first people I called to just say, what do you think I should do? Should I go this route? Should I go this route? Can you just talk me through the pros and cons? Because she'd experienced it before, been there before. And it's hard to explain how invaluable that is when you're in the moment and you just don't know what to do, to even have someone who you look up to and admire and respect to talk it out with.
Yeah, and I would say, for me, I think there are two slightly different kinds of mentors in my life that have been extremely instrumental. One is kind of a life mentor, and the other is more of a career mentor. So on the life mentor side, I, like Stephanie, my first big mentor in life was my honors thesis advisor, the former dean of the Honors College, Tom Hibbs, who agreed to supervise my honors thesis. And I went to him just because I knew that we had common interests on philosophy, and I was writing a thesis on a movie, and he does similar writing, and I thought we'd be a good match. And so that was really the only reason I reached out to him. But as we worked together, he became extremely invested in my work and my life and career goals. So much so that about 3 years after I graduated from Baylor, I sent him an email because I wanted to apply to work for Justice Willett on the Texas Supreme Court, and I didn't have any connections to Justice Willett, but I had seen that Dean Hibbs served on the same board as Justice Willett at Baylor. Google can tell you really great things, and that's how I discovered that connection. And so I emailed him and was like, look, Dean, I would love to work for him. Can you just give me any advice on how I should approach this? And he ended up, instead of responding to me, he forwarded my email to Justice Willett, typos and all. And that's how I got my very first job right out of law school, was that connection and that kind of mentor figure in my life. So I owe Dean Hibbs quite a bit of gratitude for making that happen. On the career mentor side of things, I'm a huge proponent of seeking out people who have done what you want to do. And when I was in law school at LSU, I had followed the story of an LSU law grad who had become the first Supreme Court law clerk in the law center's history. And she just shattered the charts in every category. And I knew she was working in Houston at the same time that I would be doing a summer job in Houston. And so I emailed her and I introduced myself and said, look, I can't claim to be as great as you were, but I would love to buy you coffee and talk about how you thought about all of the different points in life and the decision points that you approached during your law center career, during your clerkships. She graciously agreed to have coffee with me. We had like 5 or 6 coffees over that summer because I was in the process of applying to another judge, a judge that she had clerked for. And at the end of the summer, I sent her an email and said, thank you so much for all of our meetings. I applied to the judge. I couldn't have done this without you. I just want to say thank you so much for all your time. And she responded. She was like, oh, I'm having lunch with the judge tomorrow. I'll let her know you applied. And lo and behold, I get a call from Chambers after lunch the next day asking me to come in for an interview. And that was just kind of a glaring snapshot of how much of an impact a mentor figure like that can have in your life. So I would say, think about mentorship in those terms. Think about mentors in life who can talk to you about general life advice, how you would go throughout life, not necessarily tied to your career, but also think about people who have done what you want to do and who might be able to give you good thoughts about how to approach each decision point that you know is coming up in your career.
I would say, so similar to Ben, I have mentors in kind of both categories of career and life. Some of them actually kind of straddle that line. But I think it's so key that the person that you're looking up to is also someone that you respect their in-office life and their out-of-office life, which both Stephanie and Ben have already said. And something that was just top of mind for me was wanting to, I guess, not only was I looking at different people who are already mentors in my life, as far as, okay, what are they doing for work? Like, kind of how did they get here? And had already, I guess, assessed their work ethic, but I was also just thinking of how they, I guess, attempt to make that balance or integration in their work and their life. And just knowing my own tendencies, I think I can tend to overwork or to kind of only put all of my energy into work. And fortunately, the mentors that I do have were really honest about times that they burnt out or times that relationships were broken and needed to be mended because they kind of put all of their energy in work, and just how that was also top of mind for them. And so it was just the first time that I saw, I guess, this balance or attempt to balance not just work, but also life, right, and their relationships and their well-being. So that was one thing. And I think that sometimes people think, oh, when I'm getting a mentor, I need to make it really explicit that I want them to be my mentor. And that can be really nerve-wracking if you're the person who's about to ask, hey, do you want to be my mentor? And I know people who've done that and it's worked out great. So I'm not saying that that's not a route that you should take, but know that you don't have to take that route. For all of my mentors, actually, it was just, for some of them, I like babysat their kids, and they work full time. Their husbands also worked full time. And I really loved just the way that they led their office and their team, and also led their team at home. And so then it was just kind of the time that I spent with them, even if it was only like 20 minutes when they got home before I left, just asking questions, and asking about, oh, well, like, how did you handle that? Or, and that's also different because you have a closer, I guess, personal relationship with that person. But other times, I just think about the mentors I've had since being in DC, so only 3 years of asking, would you want to get coffee sometime? And then just continuing to ask. So sometimes it was once a month. Sometimes it was like every 2 or 3 weeks, but never having this idea of, oh, they have X, Y, and Z going on. They probably don't have any time, so I'm just not even going to ask. Because I think that's actually where people really shoot themselves in the foot. And just remembering that you can only control the input. And so as long as you're asking, it's up to them. And so it's up to them to say yes or no. So a lot of times it was just remembering, okay, well, I'm the one who is really seeking out this relationship. So I am going to be the one that, I guess, continues with that follow-up. And I guess one more thing, kind of similar to what Stephanie said about just how it felt like a friendship. And the mentors that I've had the longest are ones that I felt like we were always having a two-way conversation.
Ben and Wongani, if you've got the time, we might just turn to a couple of quick questions from students. One question was, do I need to network with the person at the top of the tree? Or should I focus on more easily established networking connections? So for example, if I wanted to work at Deloitte and I want to build a network at Deloitte, do I have to go and find, the director of finance, or can I go and build some networks with people that are more at my level that I have easier access to?
I would say, why not try both? But I would definitely, I guess, kind of pick that low-hanging fruit, right? So if you're a friend of yours who maybe is only like a year older, who's at the firm, definitely talk to them, especially because they're going to give you the most, the most accurate view of where you would be coming in at. Whereas I guess sometimes the higher the person you talk to, they can be a little bit removed from an entry-level position. And so it's just not that there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes it's just more helpful to talk to someone who's a little more close to where you would be if you were to enter the firm at that time. But I would also say that when it comes to, I guess, a place like Deloitte, that any referral is going to be super helpful, right? Anybody that says, hey, so-and-so is looking for a job. And so sometimes that's going to come from, your more peers, because they maybe will then mention to their manager, hey, a friend of mine who is still in college is really looking to get into consulting. I told them a little bit about how I've enjoyed working with you and learning from you. Would you be willing to sit with them? And so right there is, you only had one conversation, but that person had another conversation that then you are talking to someone who's a lot higher up the chain. And so I would say that, I guess, don't negate the importance of talking to people who aren't as high up. And I think that that's also just a good mindset to have wherever you work, to just remember that no matter what area or what level someone is, that they still hold a lot of significance. And so just to be willing to develop a relationship with whomever on any level.
That person won't be at that level either forever. And so that might be a relationship that you pursue for 10 years, but in 10 years' time, that person is no longer a junior associate. They're a lot further up that food chain. I have a question, Ben. I might throw this one your way. This student says, I'm from Texas, but I really want to build a network in the Northeast, specifically Washington and New York, but I have no connections there. I'd like to live and practice law there. How should I go about building a network when I'm based in Texas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, thankfully, there are a couple of easy answers. One of them, Stephanie touched on earlier in the chat, which was there are a number of Baylor networks that already exist into which you can tap and create that kind of network. So, Baylor has the Alumni Association. Baylor in DC has its own kind of alumni list, as I understand it. I'm sure there's something similar in the New York area. And so one way you can go about that is to talk to folks at Baylor about how to get access to lists like that. So it may be talking to somebody like you, Ben, or reaching out to somebody like Stephanie or me or Molly or Nate, anybody in the Baylor and DC program for DC specifically, and asking how you can plug into those kinds of networks. So I think there's like a Facebook, I'm not on Facebook, but I think there's like a Facebook page for the Baylor and DC folks. And that's a great way to kind of connect virtually, even though you're still in Texas, to connect virtually with the Baylor folks here in DC. And that's just Baylor folks, right? So once you connect with them, inevitably those Baylor connections can introduce you to folks outside the Baylor network. And then from there, your connections just blossom. The other way I would say to go about that question is to, Google is really your friend in this kind of situation. So, Google Baylor and law in DC or Baylor law in New York and see what kind of responses you get. So in the legal field, almost every law firm, certainly the international law firms, have online biographies of every one of their attorneys. And so it's fairly easy to put the right search words in to get back results that are tailored to what you're looking for. A lot of law firms' websites even have in the search bars ways that you can refine the search to search by law school or undergraduate school. So you can see which attorneys have gone to Baylor or have gone to other Texas schools or anything like that. So I would say don't be shy about reaching out on social media or through other alumni channels, and then also doing your own independent Google research to kind of see who's there in DC or New York doing what I want to do, and what ways can I contact those folks.
And I think too, there is really no difference right now with COVID between someone living in Washington, DC and someone living in Waco, Texas, because those in-person meetings aren't happening. So you're on as equal a footing as you could possibly be in terms of access to these people right now. So, I mean, you're right, LinkedIn and Google are incredibly powerful tools. I do want to be respectful of your time. So as we draw to a close, I was hoping that perhaps you could each share with us 3 little pieces of wisdom that students can take away as they look to apply what we've talked about today in their own lives and to start building their own professional networks.
Yeah, I can take that. Thanks so much again for having us. I really enjoyed the chat. If I just distill everything we talked about down to 3 nuggets, one is, I think, look, networking's tough. So I think the first nugget is learn to be confident in yourself and to be tough enough to put yourself out there in situations that maybe, like me, you wouldn't normally put yourself in, and see what the results are. Right? And so a lot of that comes with preparation and thinking seriously about what your interests are and who you want to meet. So be confident in yourself. The second is to be intentional about the kinds of relationships you want to build. I think a lot of people go into networking with a very broad net and just want to meet people for the sake of meeting people. And so they're wandering aimlessly about without any direction in life. I would say be intentional about who you want to meet. What is it about those particular individuals that makes them unique to you and makes you respect them? I think Wongani had a very good point about respecting the people that you want to be your mentors. Who do you look up to, and why do you look up to them? Be intentional about seeking out those figures and knowing why you're seeking them out. And then the third thing is, I would say in all of this, just have fun. Life is short. Careers are probably even shorter. And I think it's really helpful to remember that at the end of the day, a job and a career is just a means of trying to build the best life you can for yourself, your family, and trying to be the best citizen and friend you can to people around you. And so networking is just one small part of that whole process. And the nervous aspects, the potentially nervous aspects of networking shouldn't detract from the fun and the joy that you can get out of the whole networking process. So those are the three things I would just say.
Thank you, Ben. Wongani, what would be your 3 points?
Yeah, I think first, follow through and follow up. So, Ben, I guess you introduced this a little while ago, but just when you are connected with someone, or you do get that business card or whatever it may be, to follow through. And I was always given the guidance of within 2 days, send some sort of note. So send an email, make that connection. And as far as following up, that whether it's someone that you're hoping will mentor you, then just continue to send out the invitation of, would you like to get coffee this Thursday? Maybe a month later. Would you like to get coffee this Wednesday? But also that I think a personalized thank you just goes so far. And something that I did when I was networking, specifically trying to find a job, that for every phone call, for every coffee, that I sent a handwritten note afterwards, and telling them thank you. And I know that, especially like now, it's probably hard to send a handwritten note, and I could just send it to their office and I know that they would get it. Whereas now that may not be the case, but maybe if it's a connection that you made through like a personal friend, they may have their address, but if not, then email also is a wonderful way just to put it in writing that you really appreciate the time that somebody else took just to meet with you. And so I'd say that's my first thing. And I guess the second one I was thinking about kind of goes off of what Ben just said about having fun. And I would say that to start now developing a life that is run by rhythms instead of regimens. And I think that when you're going, I guess, with the rhythm, that it's not necessarily, something else comes up and you're reacting to it. There's definitely an intentional and a proactive way that you're still living life. But similar in music, that a rhythm is made from periodic times of stress, right? But there's creativity and there's flow to it and there's structure. But with regimens, there's rigidity. There's actually one of the synonyms is oppression with the regimens. There's just no way to flex. And I think, especially when you don't know what life is going to have, like a pandemic, that we have to flex. But also in this time, thinking about muscles that you've already developed. And so that discipline that you developed from school or different internships, thinking about those skills and tapping into those skills, but I guess almost like being willing to do all that you can, but then presenting it with an open hand, and that way, at least like your fingers aren't being pried open when things don't go exactly how you had planned. Just because that's not life. And I would say, and this is also coming from someone who kind of like changed their majors 3 times, and now I work in business management consulting, though I study nutrition and exercise science. That it's taken a lot of turns, but it's wonderful. And yes, I'd say follow through and follow up, and learn how to live a life that is built on rhythms. And I guess even kind of being back off of that is, as Ben had just mentioned, that this is not the end all be all, right? And this is like your work is hopefully not going to be up until the end of your life. But also shouldn't take up all of your life while you're living it, right? And so I think even now to start thinking about, okay, what are pieces of my life that I really want to prioritize, and thinking about what you're really valuing now, and are you pouring into those things now? Because it's significantly easier to then carry that out in your career than, say you are 50 or you're 40 and work has been basically your idol, since you're 18 and you left school. And I talk to colleagues all the time of how it's hard to switch that off, and that they'll give me advice of like, think about it now. Like, do you want to prioritize your friendships and your time with your family or your hobbies? Then know when to shut it off, know when to come offline, because there's always work to be done, right? And obviously you have to be mindful and be wise about that, depending on deadlines and whatnot. And there's definitely seasons where work takes priority than my personal life. But to just start thinking about those things now, and thinking about how now you can, I guess, start tapping into those things. That's what I say.
Wonderful. Well, Ben and Wongani, this has been really, really helpful and insightful. And I know our students will be grateful for the wisdom that you've shared. So thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This is fun. Thanks.
Thank you.